Good afternoon all and welcome to Cipriani College of Labor and Co-Operative Studies Project Management webinar series entitled The Project Management Implications of COVID-19. I am Nigel Bagwood-Saran, the Head of Department for Project Management at the college, and I am delighted to be your moderator for the fifth and final installment within our five-part webinar series. Yes, I said it correctly, the fifth and final installment. It has been a long journey, and thank you for spending all this time with us. Our session this afternoon speaks to delivering on business projects in a COVID-19 environment. And in this session, we will explore how businesses are using project management strategies to restart their workplace projects, which would have come to a screeching halt by the advent of COVID-19. At this point in time, businesses are restarting these projects and more so reshaping their business projects in an environment which has radically changed due to the advent of the COVID-19 pandemic. This afternoon, I am particularly pleased and ecstatic to welcome our key presenter for this afternoon, Mr. Vaughn Halliday, who is a facilities management professional. In his session, he will be sharing experiences of companies who are reshaping their business strategies and operating model in order to meet the new demands of the COVID-19 environment. But before we kickstart our live session here this afternoon, I would like to give you an overview of all the sessions within our five-part project management webinar series. Our series started 2 months ago, where every 2 weeks, we would have been having a particular session on a project management team which has been impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. In our first session, we spoke to the impact that COVID-19 is having on the strategic planning processes of organizations and how organizations rather will have to adapt to this new normal. In our second session, we went on to speak about project identification and selection, right? And the various types of criteria that will justify selecting projects in this new normal environment. Our third session was took on a procurement team where we looked at procurement strategies for a COVID-19 environment. And our fourth session, we spoke about how businesses are using ICTs to optimize their projects as they navigate this new normal. In our fifth session, our last session here this afternoon, we are going to speak about delivering on business projects in a COVID-19 environment. So in case that you are now joining the webinar series on its very last episode, please feel free to visit our CCLCS YouTube channel, where you can participate and view all 4 video recordings of the 4 sessions which went by. In fact, our marketing and stakeholders department just informed me that these 4 sessions had over 1,000 views over the past 6 weeks to 2 months. And I know with this 5th session, right, we will climb to about over 1,500 views. So please feel free to check out these videos on our YouTube channel. I would just like to take the opportunity to thank all the presenters who presented for the first 4 sessions. And later in this presentation, I will speak much more on that. I now take the opportunity to welcome our key presenter for this afternoon, Mr. Vaughn Halliday. But before I do so, I must confess, I was given his contact by a mutual colleague, by one of our staff members, Ms. Cynthia Hayes. And when I reached out to Mr. Halliday, right, and told him about this particular webinar series and how the college and the project management department rather wanted him to present under the Cipriani brand, he was most willing and most ecstatic about the opportunity, and immediately almost his details and credentials and skit of the particular session, very enthusiastic. So it is with great Cipriani appreciation and humility, I would like to welcome Mr. Vaughn Halliday to the Cipriani team and presenting here this afternoon. And in order to ensure that I capture his tacit experience and credentials in the right way, please allow me to read his biodata. Mr. Vaughn Halliday is a dynamic facilities and project management professional with a 20-year management career spanning both the operational and strategic aspects of facilities and projects locally and in the wider Caribbean region. Vaughan actively lectures in both project and facilities management. He's an International Facility Management Association qualified instructor, as well as a commissioner on IFMA's certificate committee. He's also a founding member of the local chapter of IFMA, International Facility Management Association, and currently serves as the immediate past president. Vaughan holds an MSc in Project Management and a BSc in Management Studies. He also holds the esteemed Project Management Professional Certification from International Project Management Institute, Certified Facility Management, CFM, Facility Management Professional, FMP, and Sustainability Facility Professional credentials. So it is great excitement. We would like to welcome Mr. Vaughan Holliday to our presentation here this afternoon. As you guys can see, I am very excited to kick off this afternoon session despite the inclement weather on my side here in Central Trinidad. I know many of you may be at work, some may be at home, some may be having a working lunch, right? Some may be in your cars using your mobile phones to access this live webinar session. Regardless of your venue or device, I encourage you to be highly involved, highly engaged. Please feel free to post your comments and questions to the message window to the right of your screen. Mr. Halliday is very engaging, very entertaining. I know he will be asking questions during his presentation, as well as there will be a formal question and answer session towards the end. Without further ado, with great Cipriani appreciation and humility, I would now like to welcome Mr. Halliday to the virtual podium.
Good afternoon, Nigel. Thank you for that very enthusiastic welcome. It certainly is a pleasure to be here this afternoon. And I have to say, when you gave me the invitation, I was most enthused, as you said, because I found that the topic and the form that you were doing was most appropriate in today's current environment.
Thank you.
So with that, I'd like to say good afternoon to your listening audience, and I'll get straight into it.
Thank you, Vaughan.
So in today's presentation, we're going to be speaking about how you can better deliver on business projects in a COVID-19 influence environment. So I'd like to begin by starting by putting things into context as to where we are now. As you know, countries throughout the region have been significantly impacted by COVID-19, both businesses and households alike. We're coming to terms with the closure of borders, with social distances, significant drops in terms of our economic activity. So I'd like to put it in both a global perspective as well as a local perspective. The World Bank has announced that the pandemic is expected to plunge most countries around the globe into a recession within 2020. And they expect that the per capita income of most countries are going to have the largest contraction since 1870. Globally, we've seen over 26 million cases, and unfortunately, we are rapidly coming closer and closer to 1 million deaths. Locally, as of today's date, I believe we're around 1,941 cases, and unfortunately, with 21 deaths. Internationally, we're seeing economic shrinkage in terms of average falls in the global GDP, ranging in the vicinity of about 5% on the most optimistic outlook. But if things continue at the rate that they're going now, we may be looking at shrinkage as large as 8%. And in Trinidad and Tobago, we're looking at a fall in our GDP, probably anticipated to be around 4.5%. And overall, this is the first forecasted increase in global poverty that we would have had globally since 1998. So we're looking at an increase of 49 million more people globally who will now be classed within the scheme of poverty. Now, this has significant implications for our businesses. It has significant implications of how we move forward. And it also has significant implications for projects within our organizations. So within today's webinar, we're going to be discussing the risk of an extended project hold during COVID-19. We're going to look at how we can analyze the impact of either closing down our projects or slowing them down during this period. We're going to look at some quick project management strategies to both restart our projects as well as to protect our projects within the COVID-19 environment. We're going to look at a framework that you can use in determining how best to go about relaunching your projects. And then we're going to look at how we can possibly try to find some more positive aspects in terms of trying to identify some business opportunities within this environment. And now I'd like to start by just giving a little bit more of an overview on project risk. Now, project risk is a specific event or condition that may or may not occur in the future, which has the potential to negatively impact the project. Now, most persons focus on the negative impact, but the risk also can have a positive impact on the project. And that's one of the key points that I want to highlight. Now, again, risk is something that may or may not occur. So when a negative risk has actually occurred during the project, it is then called an issue. Now, conversely, when there's a positive risk that's occurred, it's called a benefit. Now, in managing your projects, you want to, as best as possible, to minimize any negative issues, and you want to be able to be in a position to take advantage of any positive risks that may occur in your project. Which brings us now to the discussion in terms of risk management. Now, this is a systematic approach used to analyze, identify, and manage all of your project risks. And you will also use this to determine what is the most appropriate action to respond to the risk. That will be whether you choose to defer, mitigate, minimize, or transfer that risk, or even if you choose to accept it. Now, within the COVID-19 environment, COVID-19 may be considered what we call a black swan event. It's something that is arguably non-predictable, a high impact event, and therefore in most cases, most organizations will not have had a planned response for situations such as this. So we now then have to determine what is our most appropriate response to COVID-19 and how do we best manage our projects given this environment. So this brings us now to how do we go about assessing our projects. Now, the IDB, Industrial Bank, their private arm sector has developed an excellent framework for use for assessing your projects. Now, there are a lot of questions that goes along with this in terms of helping you to assess, and what I'm going to present is just the overall view of the framework. So the first thing you're going to be doing is you're going to be looking at your project, and you're going to be looking at the environment, and you're going to be looking at your management capacity, and you're assessing your project to determine, do you have adequate management capacity to allow for your project to continue safely? Now, if the project lacks the adequate capacity, if it's high risk for the workers in the environment, if the organization and the project is not prepared to implement proper protocol controls for the management of the pandemic, then the answer to that is no. And if the answer to that is no, then you want to consider some certain aspects. You want to consider stopping all your high-risk projects. You may want to look at ramping down safely in a manner. So you may want to keep some workers on site to deal with any critical matters and make sure you shut them down safely, matters that may affect staff or community health. You want to start to implement and develop a COVID-19 response. And within doing that, you may want to look at seeking support from the partner institutions that are available to help you in such a situation. At the end of that process, you would then want to reevaluate to determine if you've then met the adequate management response for dealing with COVID-19. Now, in the case where you have insufficient systems, you have some systems in place, but there may be limited capacity for your management to handle the situation, you may be able to have a partial meeting of those requirements. In such a case, then you may want to consider maybe pausing temporary work stoppage or reducing the scope of your operations to make sure that you can put the necessary improvements in your COVID-19 response in place. You also want to ensure that you have proper resources and effective implementation of the safeguards and measures that are needed to protect your personnel during this point in time. When you've done that, again, you then go back and you will do a reassessment to verify if your management capacity is adequate. Now, this is all about continuous improvement, and it's not just a one-off exercise. You'll be continuously looking at this and making the determinations. Do you need to make further adjustments? Is what you have in place adequate for the situation? Now, if you've deemed that your management response is adequate, the evidence is showing that the project management capacity is there and you have adequate response, then your next step you want to go to is assessing the context and the specific project risk. So we're analyzing the risk along 3 points. You're looking at your management capability to respond, to put measures in place,